But my major injury was something that went back also to high school. I sang sick in a performance. I had a leading role in Once Upon a Mattress, which for those of you who sing, you'll know it's a huge belty role. And I was sick, and I sang anyway because there was no other option other than canceling that night's show. And I graduated from high school and went on to college. And I think this is a thing that happens to a lot of musicians is you go into college, things are ramped up, the teacher doesn't know your history. And I had lost the entire top octave of my voice, but my teacher didn't know that. Nobody ever said, why don't we have you evaluated? Let's send you to an ENT. And then in about, I think it was 2011, I was in a workshop about vocal health, and there was a speech language pathologist teaching it. She grabbed my throat and said, "You have MTD," which is muscle tension dysphonia. But it ended up also being a misdiagnosis. And yeah. So I went through all the therapy. I did all the things I was supposed to do. No great results. I went back and was evaluated, and finally in 2019 diagnosed with singer's dystonia, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with vocal dystonia. This is a dystonia in the larynx. Let's be very clear. Music is movement. Anything you do to create music, the way you change any phrase is you change your movement. You cannot create a musical phrase without movement. So really, it all comes down to our inner healing, and how do we best support that? And
right.
I think
facilitate that, yeah.
How to facilitate and support it, but that all the healing comes from within.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I love getting to talk to our guests, both off and on the camera, and just getting to know them personally, but also them professionally. And one of the things I was talking to our guest today about just before recording was how the podcast has given me a lot of new knowledge and experience with body mapping and just that as a concept, because I hadn't heard about it before we started doing this show. And one of the things that I knew I wanted to really highlight was the things that we don't necessarily hear a lot in our music degrees or our music education programs. And this is one of them, although luckily it's starting to become more of a part of the vernacular for musicians and music education. And so today's guest comes highly recommended from past guests that we've had on the show. She is a vocalist, also a body mapping educator. In fact, she's actually on the education committee for the Association of Body Mapping Education. This is Dr. Bonnie Draina, hailing from the beautiful state of Colorado. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Clark. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here and we're able to get this going. Bonnie, what we usually do as we start these episodes is we like to just share the experiences that we've had with injury. I know you've had some pretty significant experiences with vocal issues and injuries and things like that. And so I just want to give you the floor and share whatever you feel like would be meaningful for you and about
Sure.
your experience, your personal experience, and how you got into then body mapping.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm actually going to start with the first musical injury that I was aware of that I had that was a musical injury, which happened when I was in 8th grade. I was in marching band, and I started out on trumpet, and they kept moving
No
me
way.
to lower and lower brass until finally in 8th grade they tried me out on sousaphone, and it was a disaster. I had terrible back pain, and I ended up going to the doctor, and they did X-rays, and all they could think of to do for me was muscle relaxants, and I ended
Wonderful.
up switching. Yeah, it was really not helpful at all. But this was a long time ago, and then I switched back to baritone horn, and that took care of the problem. I also, looking back, I recognize that as a short person, I had back problems also from playing piano without appropriate alignment. And those kind of carried through into my later years. In high school, I was diagnosed with lordosis, which is also called swayback. And I know that I don't have that condition. It just appeared that way because of the way I was postured. But my
Interesting.
major injury was something that went back also to high school. I sang sick in a performance. I had leading role in Once Upon a Mattress, which for those of you who sing, you'll know it's a huge belty role. And I was sick, and I sang anyway because there was no other option other than canceling that night's show. And I ended up having complete laryngitis for 4 days. I actually went to Wake Forest University for an interview for a scholarship with zero voice, which was quite an experience. And I recovered. And I graduated from high school and went on to college. And I think this is a thing that happens to a lot of musicians is you go into college, things are ramped up, the teacher doesn't know your history. And I had lost the entire top octave of my voice, but my teacher didn't know that. So I sang through that degree. I took some time off and worked. I went and did a master's degree and a doctoral degree. We'll probably get back to my master's later. And nobody ever, I had technical problems throughout. And nobody ever said, why don't we have you evaluated? Let's send you to an ENT. A soprano should have a reliable high C, and I didn't. I couldn't sing soft up in my upper voice. And then in about, I think it was 2011, I was in a workshop about vocal health, and there was a speech language pathologist teaching it. And she was using me as an example for some exercise, and she grabbed my throat and said, "You have MTD, which is muscle tension dysphonia." And so there I was diagnosed, or so I thought, in front of a group of my peers. Um, but it ended up also being a misdiagnosis. And
Oh,
yeah. So I went through all the therapy. I did all the things I was supposed to do. No great results. I got several opinions, second opinions. Someone's thought maybe I had some vocal fold scarring. And finally, I ended up being invited to Korea to speak. And while I was there, the doctor offered also to evaluate me. So I went back and was evaluated, and finally in 2019 diagnosed with singer's dystonia, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with vocal dystonia. This is a
mm-hmm.
dystonia in the larynx, and it's a fairly new diagnosis. Um, and it was not really clear what the path forward was going to be. So I went home. I did the exercises the doctor there in Korea had given me. And he's a very interesting doctor. He's very focused on the whole body, which was great. I considered Botox, and I gave myself 6 months to decide, and then COVID struck.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
so I was sort of on my own, and I started singing some contemporary repertoire and working on belting. And I actually had some success with cross training, which I understand is something that in dystonia there's some attention going on with that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then looking back, I'm thinking that there's some connection to some childhood head and neck injuries, and that early illness that I sang through, that injury
Mm-hmm.
probably led to the dystonia. So I've had a lot of experience with injury and without knowing I was injured. And that's sort of what brought me into the field of somatics.
Hey, real quick, sorry to interrupt the episode, but if you are a musician who's going through an injury right now and you feel like you could use some extra help or some extra coping strategies to help you get through this really sucky, difficult experience, head to musicianunchained.com/let's hang to see if a coaching relationship would be right for you at this time in your recovery. Okay, enjoy the rest of the episode. Mm-hmm. Well, first off, I just want to, I'm curious because I've had vocalists and opera singers on the show. And obviously your instrument is your voice. It's not this external piece of plumbing, right?
Correct.
And the thing that seems to be often a through line, not always the case, but often a through line is illness and how that leads to an actual physical anatomical injury or of some kind. And so I'm curious, in your experience, as an educator and your experience in this field, what is it about illness that causes like let's say laryngitis, because that's a fairly common thing that singers can get. What is it about singing through that causes and puts the
Sure.
vocal
That's a
folds
great
at
question.
at that point?
Um, there are a couple things that go into it. The first thing that comes to mind and that most people are familiar with is the compensatory tension patterns that you set up to get through it. right? So
Yeah.
you have some sort of inflammation, or you have some sort of debilitation that you have to push through. And in order to do that, you compensate. And in the case of a singer, you adduct more tightly, you press more air. And maybe shouting is a good corollary for putting how you do it. So
Hmm.
that's the first thing. And if the illness or injury persists and you continue to work through it, those compensatory patterns become habits.
Right.
And the structure accommodates those compensatory patterns by changing. The structure will change shape, the nerve pathways will change, which ones are strongest, and it becomes habit. Then the other thing that can happen, and happened in my case, is in that moment of pushing through, you can do other types of damage. And the doctor I saw in Korea, Dr. Kim, he discussed with me that in young voices, there are certain things that can happen actually to the vocal fold mucosal tissue. Um, Certain types of cells that can get malformed or distorted in situations like that. And then that
Hmm.
becomes a basis for the new cells. And it creates patterns actually within the tissue itself. So
How
I
the
think, yeah,
tissue is healing and moving
as the tissue
forward
is
through.
healing. I'm not
Interesting.
completely clear on that, but I thought that was very
Yeah.
interesting. He thought it was particularly important that this injury had occurred when I was a teenager and that it was
Uh-huh.
more on a cellular level. Um, and I'm actually planning to write to him because I'm recovering right now from a head and neck injury that happened about a year ago, and I
Hmm.
am working with an amazing manual therapist. He's almost a magician who's been addressing some of the injury, a head and neck injury I had when I was 7, that
Hmm.
has also reshaped my instrument. And so as that comes back into alignment, I think I'm going to have really great success completely recovering, hopefully, from the dystonia, but it's taking a whole team, right?
Right. Right. And I'll get to that in a second, that team
Yes, yes.
aspect of it. But and I don't usually go super deep into the weeds of the science behind it, but that's just a connection that I just made while you were talking. It was because with focal dystonia, what they're starting to find is that it stems from repetitive strain, right? Repetitive
Yes.
strain injury, and that comes through like playing through inflammation, not giving your body enough rest. And it just seems like I mean, again, I'm a student of this. I'm not an expert. So just it seems like there's a through line for vocalists too of like pushing through something that an inflammation or some like I guess the sickness part of it is just kind of the cause of the inflammation. Am I understanding that right?
In my case,
And
yes.
right. And then that can lead to these other maladies like dystonia, right? Am
Right.
I?
And yes. And you bring up dystonia. That's actually a very interesting case. Is
Mhm.
the scientists, the neurologists believe there's a genetic predisposition to dystonia,
Right.
and it sometimes occurs in families that have other types of neurological issues. Um, and in focal dystonia, it's very interesting for body mapping people because we're looking at how the representation in the brain matches the body. And in focal dystonia, what we're hearing and what we're learning is that the maps, for example, in a guitarist or a pianist with a hand dystonia, the maps of the individual fingers become blurred in the cortical representation. And so
Wow.
the movement impulse becomes blurred. Uh, Same for an embouchure dystonia.
Yeah.
Um, so I have a colleague who had an embouchure dystonia, and it began to affect his eating.
Mhm.
Usually, the dystonia will be very task
It's task
specific in
specific, right.
musicians, and in my case,
Mhm.
it was very task specific to classical music, with the exception of my ah vowel. I could sing an ah vowel without dystonia, and I could sing non-classical repertoire, which is so fascinating to me. But
Yeah, yeah.
those maps, and even in areas that we don't consciously coordinate. So,
Hmm.
when a singer is imagining singing a note, or a violinist is imagining playing a note, we're not consciously thinking about all of the individual muscles and parts, but our
Hmm.
brain uses our intention to coordinate all of those parts. And in dystonia, that those pathways through that non-detailed practice, shall we say, or there are other ways of putting it, but the brain pathways and the maps in the brain become blurred, and then multiple things get triggered to contract or to act when a musical impulse or an action impulse comes through that normally would be very carefully coordinated and regulated
Hmm.
in a non-dystonic brain.
Wow. Wow. That's like that's some new stuff that I haven't heard yet. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, and part of the
Uh,
challenge of treating dystonia is that my colleague David Vining in Arizona,
yeah.
the
Yep.
trombonist I was talking about, he had a wonderful way of explaining it. When you're creating new pathways in the brain, the problem is the dystonic pathway is already, it's like you're in the sand and you've drawn a line in the sand, and that's your pathway to make this sound, and you're trying to
Yeah.
draw a new pathway right next to it, but until that new pathway is deep enough, you just keep falling into the old pathway.
Right. Right.
It's
And
really
this is kind of
challenging.
where, yeah, it's very, very challenging. And I've noticed that with not just dystonic injuries and the experiences I've heard from others with that, but also just any sort of performance well, a performance injury that is caused by overuse or habits, misconception of habits, healthy playing habits, regardless of the instrument. Um, I want to get back to your story in a second, but
Sure.
since we're on this topic, I wanted to ask you as well about this need of to change these habits. It's very difficult. It can be very difficult um, to change vocal habits or performing habits, anything that has to do with our technique or our ability to perform. And so what are some of the ways that like have helped you um, when changing those habits or the people that you've worked with? Because that's can be a very, very discouraging and frustrating part of the process of recovery, is that that concept of like, I have to change how I play, and like I'm a professional or I'm a college student. I've been doing this for decades.
Yeah. Um, Boy, people aren't really going to like what I'm going to say, but for me, it was, I really had to step away from performing. And when I was working with the muscle tension dysphonia, that I did make progress, and I think I was working on the not the dysphonia, but I think I was working on the dystonia without knowing I had it. Was to just completely stop performing, and it was actually very difficult to continue teaching because in my modeling for my students, I was reinforcing my own habits. So for me, it was a question of completely stepping away from performing, uh, not trying to perform any repertoire that I already knew. And then when I was at a place where I felt like I could sing without um, hurting myself or slipping back into patterns, I completely switched genre and repertoire. So I used to be a high classical soprano, and now most of what I sing is musical theater and pop stuff, and just in studio. I still teach classical and I still model, but I really need to balance that with other stuff. If I were going to completely go for recovery, I would probably give myself 6 months to a year before I would
Hmm.
step back into classical repertoire performing at all. And I don't think that's in the cards for me. There are other people who are much more experienced in recovery from dystonia and leading people through, and they probably have some other opinions about that. Um, because there are people who do need to continue in some way being involved in music. It's your
Hmm.
lifestyle, it's your career, it's your part of your self map. Um, and so getting into academia, can we switch focus to academia for a second? It's particularly difficult to recover from injury as a musician in a college of music or a conservatory because of the requirements for repertoire and the performance requirements. Now, I know this is changing to some extent, that some students who are injured are able to do a sort of a project about their recovery or other things. But
Mhm.
I really feel
This is
that
what that's what this podcast was for me.
that's
To
what
be
it was,
honest.
right?
Yeah.
It's your way of
Yeah.
doing something with that time that's productive, and you're learning something that's incredibly important. But the NASM requirements are that freshmen have to do this and sophomores have to do this, and the teachers are bound by that, and their hands are tied. And I personally feel like in many cases that can result in injury. Someone has a small problem, a technical fault, and there's no time to really thoroughly address it with easy repertoire, minimal repertoire, because you have to keep pumping it out.
Mhm.
And I think that that's changing, but I'm not part of that world right now, so I don't really
Obviously, I'm a product of that,
know.
of being able to be flexible. I credit my professors at BYU during my undergrad of being flexible with what I needed. I mean, because at the
Yeah.
point that I decided to do this podcast, I had already been through a year trying to figure out what was going on, trying to get back to my original path, my original plan. And it's kind of like, developing new habits. Somebody on the show once said that one of their mentors in their recovery was that, or told them to not expect it to feel how it felt before
Hmm.
when recovering, because, I mean, just physiologically, you're different. When it comes to playing habits, you're going to be different. It's going to feel different. It's going to be an adjustment in just about every conceivable way.
Yeah.
And I think, the thing that I've learned just over the years of my recovery and just choosing to do different things. I mean, I've had to take a step back from my original plan of going through music academia.
Hmm.
I'm doing other things now.
Yeah.
But it's the principle of just being able to be adaptable and flexible. I think that's what I'm starting to see as well in music academia in general,
Yeah.
is that this conservatory model that we've known for the last 200 plus years,
Right.
maybe. It's a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful what would it be? Apprenticeship model of like just teaching, and mentoring, I guess. But also that there are certain needs that music students have now that weren't relevant back in that day, that
Sure.
are different, and we know way more than we did back then. So
Hmm.
of course the ways we do things are going to have to change with that and adapt. It's kind of funny, just as a side note, so I'm not a saxophonist, but my
Hmm.
dad is, and one of my mentors at BYU is a saxophone professor, or was a saxophone professor. And in saxophone gear, I guess, the Mark VI tenor saxophone apparently was the gold standard. And a lot of people still go back to that vintage horn because they say it's so good.
Hmm.
And one of my mentors, he had one of those for a while, but then he was like, technology's come a long way since we had that model, and you'd think we'd have found a better way to make a saxophone since the Selmer Mark VI. I don't even remember what year that was, but just that as a microcosm of, we're learning better ways to teach, we're learning better ways to take care of ourselves as musicians. And I'm starting to see, and we talked about this off camera, but we're starting to see some awesome changes in little pockets around the country and around the world, and research is helping and supporting that. But it's a slow process. Academia moves at its own pace, So that's why, these things like body mapping education, the Association for Body Mapping Education, and I'll be humble enough to say that things like this podcast and just like resources outside of traditional music academia are really what's going to push that change forward, in my opinion. So,
Yeah. No, I
anyway,
agree. Yeah,
yeah,
I agree. Oh, there was a thought that came into my head and it's gone. Sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. It happens. It happens. Well, why don't we talk about, your path through body mapping and how that kind of coincided with your, I guess, traditional education and navigating that.
Sure. Yeah. Um, well, I did a master's at Westminster Choir College, and I think I was very fortunate to be in that really small setting, and at a school that really has an emphasis on education. Their education department is really big, and they weren't quite as tied to the repertoire requirements. So I was able
Mm,
to do some work um, on my technique that was needed. But I had all sorts of technical problems. The upper voice was, there was a chunk of it missing, couldn't sing quietly. And I was working also as an itinerant teacher, and my arms always hurt. So I was playing piano for lessons and driving a lot around New Jersey. Um, and was so lucky that I had gotten into yoga, and I found a
mm,
wonderful yoga teacher there at Jamie Stover Schmidt, who not only was a great yoga teacher, she was also a massage therapist and a somatic practitioner. And she taught me so much about the way we experience our body and to be aware of the body and not to just be so hyper focused on the product. Um, so that was a great start. And then they would bring in the teachers to teach Alexander technique workshops. And one summer, Barbara Conable came in and taught a week long Alexander technique and body mapping. It was primarily body mapping workshop. And in that workshop, figured out why my arms hurt. It was a mismapping of the function and structure of the forearm, and I could start to see how being more clear about my physical structure and how it functioned would help me sing better. And by the end of that week, she had asked me to start training with her to join the body mapping community, which was
wonderful.
fabulous.
Yeah.
And I got to meet so many wonderful people at our summer conferences and have my lessons with her. Um, and then I decided to do my doctorate at CU Boulder, University of Colorado at Boulder,
Hmm.
because one of her students was on the faculty there, Jim Brody, who's a oboe professor who just retired,
Just
and
retired. Yeah.
he just retired, and he had been building a wellness program. He was teaching Alexander technique, and I could finish my body mapping licensure while I was working on my degree. He was on my committee. So that was a
Wonderful.
really wonderful opportunity. And the other great thing about Boulder, and one of the other reasons I ended up there, was the really robust lifestyles of health and sustainability community there. So I was able to experience Rolfing and all sorts of yoga and Feldenkrais lessons and psychotherapy and meditation and all of
Hmm.
these wonderful ways of exploring um, the the body mind connection,
Hmm.
um, and that was what brought me into body mapping. And
Wonderful.
I
No,
saw
yeah.
how it affected me, but also how it affected my students.
Yes. Yeah, let's
Right?
talk about that for a second,
Yeah.
because one of the things, again, that I realized with my injury, and I've seen so many times with guests on the show, is that the habits that we developed as um, youngsters or
Yeah.
just beginning musicians, and I'm going to be very careful how I say this because the practitioners, educators, I should say, that we have in the music education field, so many of them have just the purest of intentions when they're teaching these young kids, but just the general fact of the matter is that um, I mean, to ask somebody to teach, to just have a very extensive, comprehensive knowledge of the whole musical instrument family, and then be able to start these very unique, very individual youngsters on these instruments can lead to some incorrect playing habits just because of the nature of how we teach and just the verbiage that we use. And the thing that I've learned about body mapping is that it's very much a mental, right, of how we think about our bodies, and that
Uh-huh.
is preceded by how we're told about it, right?
Yes.
And taught
Yes.
about it. And so my
Yeah.
question is like what are some of the common like misconceptions that you see a lot of vocalists coming or your students coming into um that or common phrases that people use in teaching that just lead to these incorrect maps. You know what I mean? Just that kind of area of vocal pedagogy.
Yes. And I think it's all pedagogy. It's all musical pedagogy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. It's not limited to the world of vocal pedagogy. I think there are two primary. One is using terminology that communicates things about the body that are unintentionally that are incorrect.
Right.
And then another is overtly teaching anatomy and thinking that you're teaching it correctly, but not. So some of the phrases that we hear in singing pedagogy that can be detrimental are sing from your diaphragm, and then pointing at the abdomen and contracting the abdomen, which conveys a completely incorrect concept of what the diaphragm is and what it does, and what we should be doing with the breath while we're singing. The hot potato, having a hot potato in your mouth is another one. That's to help lift the palate and create a round space in the mouth. Imagine you have a hot potato in your mouth, which can be very detrimental. Also, imagine there's a string lifting you up. Now, for some people, that can be helpful. And for other people, it can lead to tucking and contracting in the front of the neck and stretching the back of the neck. So not having an awareness of what alignment is, and I'm using the word alignment as in lined up, but also all parts being in agreement. And so I guess the one that posture. So posture is a big one in the body mapping world.
Straighten up as I
look at you with your straight.
You called me out. Yeah.
So the word straight is terrible, terrible, terrible. The word posture, the Latin root is I believe ponere, which is to place.
Okay.
To put. So we teach posture as putting yourself in a position. And how do you look? So if we're teaching posture as a position that looks right, we're completely neglecting to teach how does it feel? Are you able to move easily and freely from that position? Because let's be very clear, music is movement. Anything you do to create music, the way you change any phrase is you change your movement. You cannot create a musical phrase without movement. And in the best playing and the best singing, the whole body is available and engaged, maybe not working, but part of that creation of that phrase. And so when we teach a posture that is stiff, and in singing, there's this, the noble posture with the lifted chest, which I'm not saying is wrong, but if the lifted chest comes at the expense of the back being pulled in and tight and keeping the ribs from moving freely at their joints with the spine and at their cartilages in the front, you've completely negated any benefit of that posture. So when we're in body mapping, we use words like poised or buoyant, aligned, balanced, and we work with people to give them the experience of finding balance. We don't ever use the word straight because the spine isn't straight. Let's see, I have one of my models here. This unfortunately has a relatively straight spine, but you can see here there's a curve in the lumbar
natural
spine.
Curvature. Yeah.
This thoracic curve is really he's been in a box, I think, so his curve is all messed up. But there are no straight lines in nature, right? Everything is a curve, and so we'll look at the pelvis. Are you imagining that you're sitting on your legs, or are your legs, if you're seated on, here's a pelvis, if you're seated on a surface here on the sit bones, they can rock. You can sit on one or the other, and you're not trapped. The legs are not trapped. The legs are on the side of the body. And so we'll spend a lot of time with models and pictures and the kinesthetic sense of the person to help them find their best balance, find their best alignment, so that in any moment they can move in any direction with any part of the body to create the musical impulse that they're imagining.
Hey, sorry to interrupt the episode yet again. But I wanted to tell you that if you are also a music educator of any kind and you feel like this is a conversation that needs to be had for your program, please reach out to me at clark@musicianunchained.com, and we can talk about how we can collaborate together to bring these topics, to bring these strategies to your program to help your students stay as healthy and as happy as they can while pursuing their passion. Keep on keeping on and continue watching the episode. Yeah, that's gold right there. And it just brings so many other thoughts to my head about not just, our body map, but also just kind of like what we were talking about before, which is like the flexibility and adaptability to our own needs and our own circumstances, where it's going to be individual. It's going to be unique to when our situation changes. I mean, I'm just talking like life, I guess, or musically, right? And the reason why I'm thinking about this is like just in my personal life, some circumstances have changed, so my schedule has to change, but my goals have stayed the same. It's just my system for achieving those goals adapts to your circumstances. And to kind of connect the dot, is when we have students, like you said, there's no straight lines in nature. There's no identical way that you're going to teach two different individual human beings that are two completely physiologically different human beings. Obviously, there's like laws of nature. There's certain principles that guide our education, our pedagogy, but this is where knowing the individual, knowing how the body works, knowing how the mind works, it's just so much more integral to music education than I think we originally give it credit. And so I have to be careful I don't get it on a soapbox right now. But that's
okay.
Kind of
you make a very important point about each student is individual and each psyche. We're talking right now about the physical, right? But it's also the psyche. Right. And what is that student's goal? What and how do they want to sound, rather than imposing. And I think one of the things that people get trapped in is this idea that if you're a great singer or you're a great player of an instrument, you're going to be a great teacher. And I'm going to be careful too, right? So my experience, my first job out of undergraduate, I was so lucky. I got to work in the offices of the New York Philharmonic. So
cool.
I could go to rehearsals and I could go to concerts, and I met all the donors, and I was there in my Doc Martens. Completely ridiculous. But I got to hear Pavarotti sing, and it was like the dream of a lifetime. He's always been my absolute favorite singer, and I have an aunt who actually was at the conservatory with him, and she told me all sorts of stories about him. But I was so excited when a little while later he was teaching a master class at Juilliard, and I was taking a night class at Juilliard, so I was able to go to this master class, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to learn all the secrets of why he's so great. But he was not a great teacher. like he knew how to elicit artistically, but when there was a technical problem, he had no idea, and he never had to struggle. He just had that golden throat and that gift. And I really believe that the reason I'm a good teacher is, I come from a family of educators, but I also really struggled. And I really had to think about what I was doing with every phrase and how I was, what was making my technique work and what was not making it work. And then I'm able to take those skills to my students and think about, what does this person want? What is working in this phrase? And always be really careful not to be negative, right? Because that doesn't help. So anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
No, that's great. And I agree with you. And there's that horrible phrase as well that's like those who can't play
those
teach.
Those who can do.
It's like,
I have it written down here to talk about those who can do, those who can't teach.
Right.
It's said as an insult. But there's a grain of truth. There's a grain of truth to it. If you can do something, we'll go and do it, but don't assume you can teach it. And I'm not saying that there aren't wonderful performers who are great teachers, because there are, and I've studied with some of them. But
it's a nuance, and Well, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I don't remember. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's a nuance, and yeah, the thought that I had was just, so I'm in a performance psychology degree right now, and
Yeah.
I attended a wonderful conference, specifically surrounding performing artists. So performance psychology for the performing arts, right? And the thing that was just hammered home to me then, because I'm an analytical thinker, I think very deeply about things, and just being in this world of musician health and wellness, you think very technically about things. And I haven't been performing for a while, but to the credit of the educators who maybe haven't spent as much time in like the weeds of the technical, I think there is still an element of a huge element of value to that artistic side of grounding us in the obviously the art of music. We don't want to necessarily be thinking about these things when we're performing. Everybody talks about that, but also just in general, I'm curious your perspective of the like the balance between technique and artistic, because obviously, if you go to either end of the spectrum, it's not going to be helpful. So where do you feel like the sweet spot is? Not necessarily from a performance standpoint, talking more about the from the pedagogy standpoint of
Mm-hmm.
balancing the technical and the artistic.
Sure.
Because it is an art form, right? Of
Yes,
music.
absolutely. And the technique is always in service of the
Absolutely.
art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And boy, that's a big question. In the vocal field, and I think in
Mm-hmm.
other instruments as well, there's this concept that there are some teachers who are teachers of technique and some who are really great teachers of the artistry. Um, I don't I don't know if that's true. I think it is. Like if you think of Pavarotti, he could teach the artistry, but
Mm-hmm.
not the
Mm-hmm.
technique. But I think that it's important for all of us to think about what are we expressing? Why are we drawn to perform?
Mm-hmm.
And if we learn our music without attention to the expressiveness of it, the meaning for us, the meaning we hope to convey to the audience, if we're solely focused on technique in our practice and in our lessons, we run up against state-bound learning. And I'm sure in your degree, you're
Mm.
probably familiar with this concept, right? So the mental state in which you are or in which you are when you're learning something uh, is tends to be the state that you perform at best. So if you're always in a little square box of a practice room, pounding out a phrase or belting out a phrase and ignoring your surroundings because they're so ugly and not claiming space
Mm-hmm.
and not attending to your expressive needs, then when you finally get in front of a jury or an audience, you're likely to not perform it the way you did in the studio. First of all,
Right.
because you'll realize, oh, I should be expressive here. And secondly,
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't practice it
You
expressively.
didn't practice it expressively. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then why does an audience want to hear music? They don't come to the concerts to hear perfect phrases. They come to concerts to be moved. And
Absolutely.
if we don't consider that in every step of our practice and of our teaching, we disappoint the audiences. And
Mm-hmm.
there's this whole situation with mirror neurons. So the audience
Oh yeah.
the audience feels what the musician is conveying and what the musician is feeling because of mirror neurons. And so if we go out in front of the audience and we're not truly feeling the music and we're just putting it
Mm-hmm.
on, the audience's experience is different. So I'm not really answering your question specifically the way you asked it, but I really feel like attending to, and I think that this would also prevent a lot of injuries because
Mm-hmm.
you would be expressing feelings instead of getting so locked in and hyper focused on getting
Right.
a specific note right. Is the
Mm-hmm.
note expressive? So Wesley
Mm-hmm.
Balk was a wonderful opera director, and he talked about the one and only perfect sound versus, which is OOPS, oops, one and only perfect sounds versus unusual but useful. Ubu. Looks
Okay.
versus Ubu. And so I actually have right here next to me, I have cards from one of his workshops that I took many, many years ago, right after he died, actually, which is unfortunate.
Oh
And
man.
so his point was the audience doesn't come to hear, and you didn't get into music to create perfection. That one and
Right.
only perfect sound it's really not achievable. And if you get close to achieving it, it's really boring for the audience. But if you can
Yes.
do
Yeah.
something unusual and special that really communicates an idea, the audience is going to come right to you. And so this is why we change our articulations and our dynamics and our
Yeah.
timbre and all of those things, which we change through movement. But it's for communicating. And so the cards
Hmm.
I have, can you see this is so I'll say to
Yeah.
my students,
Cynical.
can you sing that warm up cynically? Okay, I'll give a new
Yeah.
key. Can you sing it as though you're pleased? How about innocent, right? And so
There you go.
really and that's what we do during warm ups and preparing a
Hmm.
song, um, to help continue building that being the primary goal is to communicate.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you went there because again, like I'm not in the performing world as much anymore. And so the keeping the artistry at the forefront, or I guess is the why of the foundation of a lot of the stuff that we talk about on the show, is just, I think, really helpful to talk about. The other thought I had was, again, going back to injury and just the propensity that, or I guess not the propensity, but the possibility of solely focusing on technical execution that leads to the tension that leads, down that path. It just made me think about, I think, just kind of what's been an underlying theme for our conversation today is that, um, when it comes to the flexibility that we want to have as musicians and artists to be able to convey different emotions and different expressions, um, when it, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to get the words right. I'm trying to be technically, execute it perfectly, right? Um, I'll just say this: when it comes to musicians who are going through injury, we talk a lot about their identity and how much
Yes.
the artistry and those expressive qualities of music is just such a part of their identity, and how when we are going through an injury, we don't want to completely separate ourselves from being a musician, because the idea of recovery is that we'll be able to recover and come back.
Right.
Obviously, a different, more evolved, more recovered, all these wonderful things that will happen, and we talk a lot about that on the show. But it's all, we want to serve the musician side of us as well as the human side of us, as well as these other identities that we have. And if we completely separate ourselves from the artistry and the musician side of our identity, then we just get farther and farther away from it, right? And it's harder to come back and get that back. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of where my thoughts were going as you were talking, just the more
Yeah.
psychological, humanistic side of, this whole
It,
thing.
and that brings me to something I've been thinking about a lot over the last year, which is, the idea that if you're going to be a successful musician, you're going to be out performing with a major orchestra or a major
Mhm.
company. Um, Music educators, it's a little bit of a different pathway, right? But there's a new field of music that I think is really going to be important in the coming years, and that's music in healthcare. And
Mhm.
the thing I love about, I have a friend of mine is at Peabody. She's helping with the curriculum and the hospitals and all of the things, getting it so this field can
Mhm.
really blossom in the next few years. And I think it gives the musicians a different way of thinking of the music. So if you
Mm.
know that you're going to be going into a cardiac ward and playing something with a gentle pulse to help people's
Mhm.
hearts, you're going to think of that a different way than if you're going into a concert hall to impress people, right? But
Mhm.
but really, it's the same thing. You're not going in the concert hall to impress people. You're going into the concert hall to influence the way their bodies are working. Or if you're going to be
Right.
playing in hospice, you're going to help someone find peace and comfort. So I there's going to be something about that really exciting. That's really exciting to me
That's
that
interesting. Yeah.
field is coming through, and the requirements to be in that field. There's some stuff that music theory, and I think that some jazz musicians are going to be really good. But that's a completely side note. But I think
Hmm.
that that's a really cool thing, and I feel like maybe we should be playing out already more in settings like when we're young musicians in nursing homes
Hmm.
or in hospitals. A lot of hospitals have pianos in the lobby now. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've been in one, but
I worked at one that had one. My day
yeah,
job last year was in a hospital and it had a piano. In fact, yeah, I mean, I don't have time to go into stories, but that was healing for me sometimes, depending on what I was going through in my life. And
right. So signing up to
yeah,
play that piano or to go
hmm,
into,
yeah,
so I'm excited about that field. I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
wonderful. I mean, yeah, that's music therapy. I mean, that's a separate thing, but it's also connected. It's using music as a modality to serve. I think is
Yeah,
just something that we as an industry could look more into in general. I mean,
yeah,
so I've got a couple more questions. This has just been, I mean, literally, I'm looking at the time. I don't believe we've been going for almost an hour, but
yeah.
it's been so much fun. The there's one last thing I want to ask you about your personal experience with
Hmm.
with injury, because I feel like it would be important for people to hear. Um, you had mentioned that you had experienced. Was it just one misdiagnosis, or was it a couple?
It was a couple.
Um, it was a couple. That's not uncommon in the musician world, especially since the performing arts medicine
Uh-huh.
field is it's getting there. It's catching up, but it's still pretty young, and medical practitioners aren't necessarily as informed in
Mm.
general about performing arts health. So I'm thinking, like, from your perspective now, as well as just like as a teacher, but also having experienced that, what are some ways that I guess can be solutions from a musician standpoint? I know
Hmm.
it's kind of a
No,
tough
that's
situation to be in, but yeah,
That's a great question. I think the first thing is there's a lot of encouraging things happening in the field right now. I
absolutely.
know
Uh-huh.
Performing Arts Medical Association is not attacking it, but tackling it from multiple sides. They've influenced the National Association Schools of Music guidelines for schools about teaching about musicians' health risks. Um,
Hmm.
I'd like to see more schools really embrace those. During the period of time where I was doing a lot of consulting, I would go into schools and I would see a poster on the bulletin board, and that would be all there was. And I would ask
Right.
about it, and they would say, "Well, because our lawyers told us that's the safest way for us to do it." And then you look at other schools like CU Boulder, where they have a wellness
Hmm.
director of the wellness program. There's an embedded psychotherapist. There's all sorts of stuff happening, people being brought in. I'm actually going to be teaching there next week to help those musicians be really well educated about the risks, about
Hmm.
things they can do to mitigate the risks, and
Hmm.
then when you're when you're well informed, you can advocate for yourself. If
Absolutely.
you don't have knowledge about these things and about the multi-pronged approach that's often needed to help with an injury, you're at the mercy of a doctor who maybe doesn't understand that. So, PAMA also has a committee that's looking at helping improve outcomes in musicians
Hmm.
and how they can go about doing that. Um, I personally think that they should have a summer band camp for physicians because they all like
That
play
would be
musical
awesome.
instruments. They all love music. They could come in, have a musician petting zoo, and try out different instruments they haven't played, and then be in an
That's
ensemble.
awesome.
I actually pitched that to a dean at a college of music, so I'm waiting for someone to call me.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm happy to, but to help the doctors really understand the challenges. I play a lot of instruments, and I actually purposely started learning cello a few years ago because
Oh,
I don't
cool.
play a string instrument. I'm like, I really want to understand the challenges that a cellist faces, and just playing a scale on a cello could really help a doctor be more informed.
Hmm.
And then Jim Brody's approach at CU Boulder was really great. He wanted to have a curated group of medical practitioners that he could call on to help students who needed it. And so he would
Hmm.
solicit opinions from or recommendations from people he trusted who had worked with doctors in the area. He would meet with those doctors or
Mhm.
practitioners, experience the modalities that they offered, if they were a physical therapist or something like that. And then he would solicit feedback from students. And then he really had a reliable network available. So that's an approach you can take on from the school point of view. And um, PAMA also is offering. Are you familiar with their certification program?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So for
Mhm.
educators and medical
And medical
practitioners,
practitioners. Uh-huh.
yeah, I've done the instrumental one. I thought it was really helpful to understand all of the elements that go into injury and recovery. And then the
Uh-huh.
final thing is, as a teacher, um, staying in the loop when your student has an issue. So, for example, if I send a student to be scoped, I
Mhm.
will send a note with them, or I'll email directly or call the doctor's office and say, hey, this is what I'm observing. This is what I am hearing. This is what they're reporting to me.
Mhm.
And this is what I suspect. And then I'll ask the student's permission to get the doctor's report, and then help sort of communicate with if they need voice therapy or other procedures. And I've even gone to appointments with students who've
Oh,
wanted
cool.
me to go, to watch them be
Wonderful.
scoped, and so I can see with my own eyes, ask questions, have the doctor have them sing certain specific tasks, and see what the response is. So there are things that we can do, but it
Mhm.
requires a community, and we really, as musicians, I think, need to be active advocates to help
Uh-huh.
physicians and other medical clinicians understand the challenges that musicians face.
Okay, last interruption, I promise you. Before we get to the rest of the episode, I just wanted to let you know that if you're a musician going through an injury and you need a community to help you get through it, if you need a sense of support, some people you can ask questions to, just gain pick me up whenever you need it. The Musician Unchained support group, formerly known as the Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group on Facebook. The link is in the description below for you to join. You don't have to go through this alone. Keep on keeping on and enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah, it's a team approach. It's a support network, and I read it all the time in the sports psychology literature that the best, one of the best indicators for recovery is social support, um,
Hmm.
and like good social support, from a whole team of individuals,
Yeah,
and so that's really encouraging. It just takes a little bit of intentionality from the musician's part and from the
yeah, yeah.
educator's part.
You
Um,
asked me in your email a really great question that
mm.
I would love to just touch on, if you don't
Please,
mind.
please, yeah.
You
Yeah.
asked me some ideas for instrumentalists that come from the vocal world, and
That's exactly what I had on here, right, I was about to ask you.
you were
We're
going to go there
we're
next.
in lockstep. Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
that was your last question. So
No, 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 no.
I'm glad we have a minute for it, because I was thinking
Yeah.
about that. And one of we talk a lot about how mental practice is actually more effective than physical practice. Um, really clearly imagining how you're going to play a
Sure.
phrase rather than just
Uh-huh.
belting it out over and over and over. And
Right.
singers really have to be intentional about that. And it's a limit it's a requirement imposed on them by the nature of the vocal fold mucosal tissue. So the vocal
Okay.
fold mucosal tissue, when we sing an A440, the vocal folds are opening and closing 440 times per second,
Right.
because of the movement of the breath. And those impacts cause friction and heat buildup in the vocal folds. And there's a cooling system in place, but the cooling system can only do so much. And so vocalists are limited how much time they can actually spend with their instrument every day. And also, if we're speaking, and that kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
imposes more limits. And so, for a
Uh-huh.
professional musician, actual vocal fold activity time is about 1.5 to 3 hours a day, maximum. Under ideal circumstances, when they're at their healthiest, they're hydrated, they're well rested.
Wow.
All of those things reduce
Okay.
it. And
Uh-huh.
so for a student vocal musician, that time limit is lower. So for freshmen, maybe they can actually sing 15 to 20 minutes at a time, take a break, come back. And so in vocal training, there's a real emphasis on counting as practice time bookwork and imagination and listening and planning and an analysis of your score. And I know that that counts in instrumental world too, but I
Uh-huh.
feel like a lot of instrumentalists think that they have to spend hours and hours and hours with their instrument to be successful. And
Uh-huh.
singers, can't, and they still manage to be successful, and you add that to the layer of language, right? So you have to think about the languages, and if you're singing in 5, 10, or 12 languages, you also have to devote time to that. So a singer might practice 4 or 5 hours a day at their peak, but they're only actually singing 1 to 2 of those at professional level. And if you exceed that, you have to take 2 days off. Too bad, because you have all that inflammation to recover from.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a mindset that maybe some instrumental students don't quite get.
Well, I mean, you blew my mind again. I just learned so much just being on this end of the microphone. You would think that, like, when something vibrates, you would think automatically that's causing friction, which causes heat, and that needs to cool down. Like, you literally need to cool down.
And there's that embouchure, right?
It's an embouchure, right? I mean, it's just one of those things where it's such a simple concept, but it's so complex in how we apply it and how we overthink it or not even think about it. You know what I mean? Like, but just, because this is what physiologically is happening. It's heating, the system's heating up. It's exerting itself. That needs rest and time to cool down. And that's something that's not like, practitioners should be a lot quieter than they are.
Yes, they should be. They should be. And they should have a lot better sound than they have. But so you bring up an interesting point, which is that you made me think of, which is inflammation. And did you have an embouchure injury? I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah. It was a minor tear that was beginning to form.
Right. Yeah. And so, I played brass as well. And so that inflammation that we experience is the body sending necessary healing fluids.
Right.
Fluids with healing properties. And so a lot of us think of inflammation as a bad thing, but inflammation is actually really important in healing. And it's an important signal that you need time to heal now. Now is the time to stop and not start compensating and not to start overworking and so this is the time for you to sit quietly with your trumpet off to the side and think about that phrase.
Or play it on the piano or sing it.
Or sing it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Usually when practitioners are quiet, it's because people are taking this thing out and just, scrolling,
taking a break,
like
but
taking a break,
which is important too.
Which is right.
But and that gets. I'm now wanting to go into the whole thing about freshman year and senior year and
Part
all
2.
the times where people want to practice so much and they just end up hurting themselves right when they need to be in their top form because of that instinct to, I've got to be in the practice room. So we didn't really talk a whole lot about body mapping today, but that's okay.
I guess not. And maybe we'll need to do a summit on body mapping at some point for the show. I'll just have all of my body mapping friends doing that. Hey, so Bonnie, I've got 2 questions that I ask all my guests as we wrap up. First of all, thank you again for being here. If anybody wants to reach out to you, how do they get in contact with you? BonnieDraina@gmail.com. Okay, wonderful. The first question I ask is something that I like to ask because podcasts were very influential actually in my own recovery and getting in contact with people. If somebody were to come up to you and say, hey, I heard your conversation with Clark. I'm an instrumentalist or vocalist going through an injury. What's one just general piece of advice you would give to someone regardless of their instrument or their injury? Someone who's going through an injury that was just just recently diagnosed injury. Yeah. The one piece of advice, make sure you have a good team and a good support system, and remember that you're still a musician and that you're going to get through it. Beautiful. And then the last question I ask is what I call my time machine question. And if I were to hand you a magic wand and the time machine of your choice from pop culture, it could be Bill and Ted's telephone booth or whatever, and you were to go back to that time of your first injury, or the one that was most impactful for your career, but you could wave your wand and take it away, take that experience completely away, or you could leave it there and come back here. what would you decide to do and why?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I mean, I'm very happy where I am right now, um, with who I am. I would I Oh, that's such a hard question, Clark, because there was so much drama and so much stress and
So difficult. Yeah.
so much money and so much
Uh-huh.
psychological stress. And to be able to go back and just miraculously make it all go away would be wonderful, but then I don't know where I would be now. And I really
Uh-huh.
adore teaching, and I don't and I adore the family I have, and I adore where I live, and I don't think I would change it. I think I would, if I could go back and change something, I would change the approach that was taken to my injuries. But that would require that I go back multiple times and influence doctors.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
too difficult.
Well, maybe I should rephrase the question. I've been doing this for a long time, and maybe I should rephrase the question and be like, what would be the one thing that you would change? Because there's so
Yeah,
many things that I mean, I have had most people answer that question and say, no, I wouldn't
yeah,
take it away, but boy, would I do things differently,
yes,
and approach my recovery differently, or um,
yes.
a myriad of different things. But
I think this kind of ties into the question you asked just before this, and it's something
uh-huh.
I've realized just very recently, is that our bodies built themselves, right? Our DNA built us, and our bodies will heal themselves. All healing is self-healing, and the only thing
Uh-huh.
doctors can do really is surgeries and broken bones.
Mm,
Um, so really, it all comes down to our inner healing, and how do we best support that? And I
right.
think
Facilitate that. Yeah.
how to facilitate and support it, and find people who will facilitate it and support it with us and guide us there. But that all the healing comes from within, and I think that realizing that a lot sooner would have been really very helpful.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for saying that. And this has just been an awesome conversation. I've really been looking forward to today, and
Thank you. So have
I
I.
mean, our conversation. I know this is going to help a lot of people, not just vocalists. At least that's my hope. Is not
Yeah.
just vocalists. Check this out, and yeah. So for everybody out there in podcast land, thanks for joining us, and make sure you check out our newsletter. If you want to get in contact with Dr. Draina, I'll put her email in the show notes and things like that. And yeah, until next time, keep on keeping on.
Thanks so much, Clark.
Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of Trust the Process, the official podcast of Musician Unchained, the newest coaching program dedicated to helping musicians navigate and overcome injury. But before you go, I have a few quick ways you can stay connected and support our growing community. If you found value in today's episode, consider making a donation to support our mission of empowering musicians worldwide. Every contribution helps us create more content and resources for you, so visit link number 2 below to support the mission. If you decide to donate, I'll send you my newest resource, the Injured Musician Toolkit, which is an ebook designed to give you tools to help you get through your injury. Subscribe to our newsletter to get exclusive insights, tips, sneak previews of episodes, and announcements straight to your inbox. Act now and I will send you a free gift. So sign up at www.musicianunchained.com/newsletter. And if you or someone you know would like to go deeper with me in the topics of injury and mindset, head over back to musicianunchained.com and check out the Let's Hang tab. As always, I want to thank Daniel Baldwin, my audio engineer, and my sister Dana Lovell for her help with the promotional materials. There is no podcast without them. But before I go, I want to tell you how much I deeply appreciate your time and support. You are not alone on this journey. There are musicians and educators out there who need this resource, and we need to get it to them. Together, we are breaking the chain of old habits and thought patterns that don't serve us anymore, and unchaining the potential within ourselves to face each challenge with strength and resilience. So, as I always say, keep on keeping on and keep trusting the process. Until next time.